Hello, everyone. My name is Ryan Guillou, and I'm the curator at San Francisco Botanical Garden. We are very happy to have all of you here for collaborating to save Magnolias with Dr. Emily Coffey from Atlanta Botanical Garden. As a reminder, this is a webinar, so all of you, your cameras and cameras and microphones have been disabled, and we are recording this session. So don't worry, none of us can see or hear you. If you do have any questions, please put them into the Q&A box below, and we will have some time to answer them at the end of Emily's presentation. So as an introduction, Emily, as I mentioned, is Vice President of Conservation and Research at Atlanta Botanical Garden, and she's the lead for the Global Conservation Consortium for Magnolias. The San Francisco Botanical Garden is a partner in that, and we are so excited to be part of this amazing global effort. And with that, I will let it off to Emily to share so much about her fantastic work and all the partnerships she's helping create.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Ryan. And it is such a pleasure to be here tonight. And we will, my computer, there we go. So it is an absolute pleasure to be here tonight, talking to you all about conserving magnolias and the work that we're trying to do to really build these global partnerships. And San Francisco Botanic Garden is part of that. And we're really excited to have you all joining us. So to set the stage a little bit, I wanted to talk about the loss of biodiversity. And all of you are probably fairly well aware of some of these figures, but this is showing us the loss of biodiversity. So you can see in this first graph that sort of the state and overall loss of the biodiversity that we have globally. And then we can see in the B, this increase in pressures. And so what we're seeing is this continuation of increasing pressures. But what we can also see is our response, the human response, to try very hard to at least attempt to face some of the challenges that we are currently experiencing. And so we can look back, this is a very short time scale, and there's a lot of additional studies that go back much further, but this is just looking at the most recent changes. And we can see things like changes in our Convention on Biological Diversity that was implemented to help protect global biodiversity. We see things like the Nagoya Protocol and the IUCN Red Listing to help really address some of those pressures that we see. But with that, we know that there's this huge diminishment of plant diversity. And we can see this through a whole suite of different pressures, from habitat loss, invasive species, climate change, population growth. And in a most recent report that came out in 2020, The State of the World's Plants by Kew Botanic Gardens, they were able to show that 2 in 5 plant species are threatened with extinction. And that's a kind of terrifying number because it feels a bit overwhelming, but it does lead to why we're doing these really large global initiatives and why we're trying to make such meaningful impacts right now. And we are living in what has been termed the Anthropocene, or the age of the humans. This is a really interesting story map. If you're interested in, I can also post this afterwards, but it's a really nice little pictorial that goes through and shows the impact that humans have had and why we are currently living through what we call this age of humans. And this here, this graphic is showing that 75% of the Earth's land surfaces outside of the ice sheets have been managed by humans. We also know that more than 50% of our forests globally have been lost, which for people like our teams and who love trees and forests, this is a really and very difficult number to deal with, and one that we're trying to help address. So why you all are obviously interested in plants. So I am preaching to the choir a little bit, but the reason that plant diversity is so important when we think about why we want to save not only beautiful plants, but just that whole diversity of plants, it's really because plant-based solutions are going to be needed to address all of the pressing matters that we are going to be facing coming forward. from food security to energy, water scarcity, human health. We know that 80% of the food that is derived from plants comes from only 17 plant families, which is not very many plant families. We also know that there's more than 28,000 plant species, which have currently been recorded as having medicinal value. And if we look at 2 and 5 of those as being at risk of extinction, that's scary because we don't want to lose those amazing resources. This is a picture there on the right-hand side from one of my friends' children that happened to open their, obviously looking for food in their refrigerator. And this is something that I've often, when I was teaching, used to sort of show that we as humans have sort of forgotten our close connections with plants, and we think we can just open our refrigerators and grab whatever is available at the supermarket, and the accessibility has really changed our perspective. But the importance is to know how plants are all connected throughout our system. And so we know that plants can truly help us to be more innovative, adaptive, and resilient. This is a picture that was shared from one of my friends that runs a conservation trust down in Tanzania. And these young men, I look at the resiliency and the just innovation. Those are plants. Basically, almost everything you see there is composed of some form of plant material. There is reeds that are constructing the pool table. They are then covering that with mud, and they're using seeds as their balls, and their cue is a stick, which is just so impressive and so unique. And what a unique and wonderful innovation that these children have expressed with plants. So to explain also, this is the partnership, this Global Conservation Consortium. It's a partnership with Botanic Gardens Conservation International, also known as Bgci. And this is a global organization that is really trying to mobilize botanic gardens across the world to help better secure the well-being of plants and animals, or plants and people. And this is the global network. You can see all of the little dots. There's over 3,000 botanic gardens worldwide that are part of Bgci. And the number of visitors, so there's over 5 million visitors that go to these botanic gardens globally. So botanic gardens are really critical to our fight against losing plants and losing that biodiversity. And San Francisco Botanical Garden is, really a member of Bgci, and truly also leading the way in conservation. So some of the technical programs that have come about through the work with Bgci is trying to promote and develop the most efficient, cost-effective, and rational approaches to plant conservation. So there's a host of various different programs that are aimed at different kinds of strategies. And the two that I'm going to be talking about are based off of this global tree assessment and the global tree campaign. And that's where this Global Conservation Consortium came from. And so with both the global tree assessment and the global tree campaign, the overall goals of those programs, which was a partnership between Fauna and Flora International and Bgci, was to really categorize and catalog the world's trees, prioritize those actions of conservation, and then work towards this constant goal of reducing plant extinctions. With more than 22% of tree species at risk of extinctions, and that is a result of the work from both the tree campaign and tree assessment, Bgci knew that they needed to step up the game and really create a new way to help address some of the most critically endangered tree species and target taxa that were at greatest risk of extinction. And that's how they actually set up this initiative for the Global Conservation Consortium. And when we look at the risks, we see that there to various different taxa. We actually were looking to try to identify groups that were highly threatened, that had a lot of technical challenges to grow. So some of the species that weren't as easy to keep in cultivation. Also species that did not store well in seed banks, so that you had to keep living collections of, and that were not able to be seed banked. And also species that were often overlooked, and species that were known to be sort of keystone species to ecosystems that were really critical in various different biodiversity hotspots. So these were the criteria that we had set up as a goal with BGCI and in the establishment of the GCC. And currently we have actually been adding, we have a new cycad consortium also, but we have Acer, maples, magnolias, oaks, rhododendron, and cycads. And all of these are led by different gardens and really pushing towards this idea of establishment of this really dedicated network where we can focus on prioritization. We can focus on ex situ or out of the wild botanic garden collections. We can focus on helping and supporting conservation efforts in countries of biodiversity hotspots through promoting research and also really supporting the capacity building of in countries. The ultimate goal with all of this is to work with in situ, or so in the wild, where the plants are actually native to, and trying to protect those lands. But first, we want to really establish all of those collections, like at places like San Francisco and Atlanta Botanical Garden, and throughout the world globally with those botanic gardens. So magnolias. One of the most common questions I get is, I had no idea that there were rare magnolias, and most people don't realize the number of magnolia species that are actually present. So there was a study, a red list assessment done in 2016 that was able to identify 304 species of magnolias. And this work, we actually have been updating this work. So we have now new species. So we have closer to 330 Magnolia species identified. But what this work did is really set a baseline for us to be able to understand why we need to address Magnolia conservation. So the initial findings back in 2016 indicated that 48% of all Magnolia species were considered as either critically endangered, or vulnerable. And that's a pretty significant number. With the new increases in individuals that we have been working with partners, and the new species that have been described in the last several years, that number has actually gone up to closer to 51 to 52% of all Magnolia species being considered threatened, which is a big number, especially when we're thinking about, more than 150 individual species we need to conserve. And when we look at Magnolia species and the number of species per country, we can actually see that magnolias are found in 47 different countries, with China having the most species rich with 108 species, and Vietnam is next with 47 species. 7 of the 10 most species-rich countries are actually located in East and Southeast Asia, with the neotropics being Colombia, Mexico, Ecuador, and the Caribbean also being centers of biodiversity hotspots for magnolias. And 2/3, or 198 of the species, are single country endemics, meaning they only occur in one country. And that's a really amazing number, almost 200 species that are occurring in just one country. Then we can look at the percentage of threatened species per country. And this is where we see that the neotropics, so Mexico, Colombia, Ecuador, Caribbean, have very high proportions of threatened species. Most of the countries in the neotropics have more than 50% of their magnolias considered as threatened. And we can actually see certain countries where we have very, very high percentages. So anywhere from 80 to 100% of their magnolias are at critical risk of extinction. And talking back to the slide at the beginning, the risk for magnolias are very similar to the risks that we see to all plant diversity loss. So we see things like logging as a major threat to magnolias, being that magnolias are harvested for wood, but also they are in forests that have additional species that are being harvested, so that overall deforestation impacts. And harvesting, so logging and wood harvesting accounts for 44% of the threats to magnolia species. Agricultural uses has a second largest, which approximately a third of all species, magnolia species, are at risk due to agricultural practices. And then overall habitat loss, and we are also starting to see climate changes and threats increasing from that as becoming a more significant factor for our magnolias. And one thing to note, there's categorization called data deficient. And when we're looking at all of our magnolia species, this category is difficult because we don't know enough to understand how to categorize them. So we are working within the consortium to try to help our partners to provide resources and gather data and share data so that we can understand more what's going on with these data deficient species. And there's almost 100 species that are considered data deficient. And often when we look at the species, what we see in the most recent work that we've been doing in this last year, we're seeing that a very high proportion, between 48 to 80% of the species that are considered data deficient are actually considered threatened. So that greatly increases that overall percentage of threatened species, of threatened magnolias. And part of that 2016 work showed that the number of magnolias in collections, so like at San Francisco and Atlanta Botanical Gardens and different gardens globally. And what we were able to do is look at all of the different records that people were reporting. And we were able to see the number of magnolia species that are found in botanic gardens. And this graph here, you can see critically endangered, that's our most vulnerable risk category. And we can actually see that the red are species that are not present. So that means that we have none of those species in living collections. So back in 2016, we see that 23 of these critically endangered species are not present. And that is something that we are trying to address with this global consortium, is increasing that number of species in botanic gardens. We can also see overall the number of collections of magnolia species. So we actually see here that we have out of the threatened and non-threatened species, the number of species that are present across collections. And what we're seeing is that we don't have a lot of individuals in collections, and we don't have a lot of collections of some of those more threatened species. And this is what led us to launch the Global Conservation Consortium for Magnolia. So in 2020, we actually were able to officially launch the GCCM. So it was definitely challenging year to launch this large consortium for magnolias. We had been building up to it and working really hard the last few years on creating structures and organization behind it. But this past year has been when we've been able to launch it and start pulling partners in. And the goal is really to mobilize and coordinate networks of institutions to work collaboratively together to really prevent the extinction of magnolias. And this has been really exciting. We've been able to have several meetings and where we've been able to have Zoom calls where we have we've had global meetings, and we've also had regional meetings that we are starting here in 2021. And what we are first doing is trying to create this network where we can start to pull people together and get everybody working towards common goals. We have been working to identify and prioritize species globally that will be of our highest priority. And this is where we will be looking for funding, and those most critically endangered species will be looking to support in-country activities and partners that are trying to do research and conservation actions for that. We have had steering committee members meetings, and this is a picture from our November meeting. And we are very fortunate that we have steering committee members from all over the globe. So from Colombia, Ecuador, Mexico, Cuba, China, South Korea, Bangladesh, Philippines are our current steering committee members. And they are individuals who are helping represent those regions and helping to distribute and get information to those regions and helping us connect with the partners that they've been working with. And as I'd mentioned, we have done more recent work on trying to identify gaps in the previous work and looking at trying to fill some of those voids. And what we've been able to show is in a 2020 gap analysis, this number, we can actually see that we have 8 new threatened species that have been added to conservation collections in botanic gardens, but we still have a long way to go. And we can see with that red, the red bars, those are species that are not reported in living collections or botanic gardens. And those are the species that we're really focusing on, those first 37 and 53 species of both that critically endangered and endangered. Those are going to be our the species we're looking towards conserving quickly in the next few years. And so I wanted to just introduce you visually to the Atlanta Botanical Garden GCCM group. So I'm Emily Coffey, the lead, and we have Jean Linsky, and Jean is our Magnolia Conservation Coordinator, and she's helping to get everybody together and on the same page and is doing a fantastic job. Jean was able to join us this summer. We were able to bring her in to this effort, and we've been really excited to have her. She's currently working remotely, as all of us often are, and she's actually came to us from Bgci, where she had been working in Thailand before. Lauren Easterman, she's one of our research scientists and has been leading efforts that I'll share with you in just a minute on some of the molecular work that we're trying to do to understand relationships in populations, how diverse collections are, and how genetically different wild collections might be from cultivated collections. And Jason Ligon is our seed bank and micropropagation coordinator, and he is working on developing cryopreservation for Magnolia seeds. He is working with the Huntington and Botanic Garden south of you all in California. And they have a large cryopreservation program that Jason has been sort of apprenticing under and learning how to keep magnolia seeds in cryopreservation and also shoot tips so that we can have additional ways to our living collections to back up those rare species. And when we look at the ABG collections, we can see this is sort of just a smattering of the different species that we have at ABG. So we have 48 different species, 55 hybrids, and 157 cultivars. And we have a really fantastic team that has been fortunate enough to start collaborating with Ryan on some projects with grafting and cuttings of some of the species from our collection. And this is one of the really great ways in which botanic gardens work so collaboratively is sharing material, sharing knowledge, and sharing expertise, and backing our collections up. Because if we have the only individual of a species, we're not doing a very good job at being able to make sure that that collection is preserved and collected and shared to conserve that species. So we really work hard to share our collections and to try to back them up in additional gardens. And I'm going to now switch over to talk about a couple of our projects and some of the work that we're doing both in the United States and then a little bit further abroad. I was talking about the work that Lauren Easterman does, and she runs this current project that we have with Magnolia fraseri and Magnolia pyramidata. We're trying to understand, these are both species in southeastern United States, and we're trying to understand if they're actually different species or if they belong to the same highly variable species. And so this is work that's funded through a large IMLS grant, and it's done in collaboration with the Morton Arboretum. We also have another project that is a very cool and exciting new look at conservation collections and collections in botanic gardens. And this is called the TREES, or Tools and Resources for Endangered and Exceptional Species. And what this is it is like a stud book or a pedigree tool in which we can track individuals just like the zoo community does with polar bears. This was first actually established for polar bears and the zoo community to be able to track mating of individuals from different zoos to ensure genetic integrity of a species across zoo collections. So utilizing the knowledge that, you know, some zoos only have a single individual polar bear, and instead of having that polar bear not be able to mate with another genetically distinct polar bear, they had to track the lineage of these individuals. And so what this is a pedigree tool in which we can track individuals, and this is plant individuals, to be able to know how related they are to one another. And then in the future, our hope is that we will be able to collect pollen from individual flowers, ship that pollen to another garden, which might have another species, another individual of that species that is genetically distinct that we would like to mate, and be able to actually create a crossbreed that is really focused on conservation genetics and the long-term conservation of that species in cultivation. The two species we're working on are Magnolia stellata and Magnolia senii. And what we're doing is we've looked at the gene pool from the wild. These are both threatened magnolias, one from China, one from Japan. And we've looked at the wild population genetics, and then we've looked at cultivated genetics. And we're trying to see how much genetic diversity we have in cultivation. And you might have seen recently, there was a New York Times article that came out about this work. And so we were all pretty excited about this. This is, like I said, led by the Chicago Botanic Garden, and is a really exciting new tool that we're very happy to be participating in. And now shifting a little bit further south, some of our work has been to partner with various different institutions that are doing some exciting research and on the ground conservation. So the University of Guadalajara in Mexico is one of our partners that we have been working on 3 Magnolia species that occur in both Mexico, and then one of them spans down to Guatemala. And what we have been able to do is secure funding to be able to help the University of Guadalajara researchers actually do more field surveys to look for individuals across the region, set up plots to be able to really look at the population dynamics, as well as study the genetic diversity. So they actually send us dried tissue, and then we run it through all of our fancy tests and are able to help tell them how diverse a population is and how many individuals they've actually been able to capture in their ex situ collections, which is pretty exciting work. And we're going to move a little bit further south now. And this is some work that we have been doing with the University of Medellin and the Botanic Gardens in Medellin in Colombia. And Dr. Marcella Sierna Gonzalez, she is one of our partners who has been leading this work. This is work that so she has been working on many different Magnolia species for she did her PhD on Magnolias and has been studying Magnolias for the last 20 years. And what she has been really looking at is trying to create these gardens outside of the wild, because she's been finding that the pressures have been so increasing in Colombia. And something that is a very interesting sort of side note, what Marcella found is that following, as the drug cartels have been sort of more under control, and there has been a change in the government, more impacts have been seen in the destruction of these tropical forests. And that's a really strange sort of side note, as these drug cartels and these drug lords that were actually protecting some of the Magnolia species because of the cocoa that they were growing. They actually had large sections of the forest that they were sort of kept off limits. And so what they've been seeing is a very large increase in deforestation. And so Marcella has been working really strongly to try to help prevent the loss of some of those magnolias. And this involves seed collection. They have to often do a lot of tree climbing and get up into the canopies of these various magnolias to be able to collect seeds. And then they come back and they're able to establish nurseries in similar climates with the help of locals, which will actually be able to provide jobs and opportunities to do reforestation. And Marcella has even been able to establish a nonprofit to try to protect magnolias in Colombia. And we've been trying to help support and really promote this work that she's been doing, because it's such fantastic work. And this is, I would say, probably the most exciting of our partners projects. And this is with the Humboldt Institute in Colombia also. And this is for Magnolia resinsupenflorea. And this is a critically endangered magnolia that is endemic to Colombia. And it is endemic to this region, this mountain up near Bucaramanga in Colombia. And it's a really beautiful, there's a picture of the tree there with a gorgeous flower. What was happening, there was a lot of deforestation going on. And Melissa is our collaborator, and what she started to do is try to work with the locals to find ways in which to make magnolias profitable and prevent the loss of this magnolia in their community. And what she was able to do, this is a really cute comic that was she had created following this project. And so what they've been able to do is utilize a part of the magnolia seed to create a molinillo, which is a chocolate stirrer. And what they do is basically they take this chocolate stirrer. I'm not sure if any of you have ever seen one of these. They are utilized, these molinillos are utilized for chocolate making, to make hot chocolate and make it frothy. And so you can see there the woman who is rubbing the molinillo between her hands, and they're often made of they're often wood-turned pieces of wood. But what they've done, this community has taken the seeds, as you can see here, from this rare magnolia. They take the seeds and actually replant them out into the forest so that they have more magnolias to be able to do this with. But then they take that seed and put it on a stick that they then can utilize and sell for these molinillos for chocolate stirrers. And I was fortunate enough that they gave me one when I was down there, but they sell like hotcakes at any of the conferences and some of their markets that are open markets. And it's a really neat project because it is both helping the community and keeping alive a tradition in the country and in these rural areas where Melissa is working, and it's been really exciting work to see her see this project come to fruition and continue. They're also working on trying to establish some shade-grown coffee under these magnolia trees so that they have additional income sources and still are able to maintain these large, beautiful magnolias and increase the population. So it's a great project that we're really, really proud of, and really impressed at how well they have been able to accomplish so much. And this is only a few years old. This project has been happening in this last 5 years. So it's really great work. And with that, at the end of this all, the whole point of the GCCs is to help encourage and do more education and promotion, and so really increase public awareness like I'm doing today with you all. So it is through all of these different avenues that we're able to hopefully make an impact in the plight of these magnolias, and hopefully be able to start to see some really positive benefits from this global consortium. So with that, I would like to say thank you. Please feel free to follow us on our Instagram page where we talk about magnolias. We actually have an upcoming speaker. Marcella is actually going to be speaking. So please feel free to reach out also if you ever have questions. And if you have any questions tonight, I'd be more than happy to answer them.
Emily, that was fantastic. And thank you so much for joining us today. I mean, it's just so exciting to see, the amazing work that's happening around the world for such a threatened group of plants. So this is really so exciting. And I speak on behalf of San Francisco Botanical Garden that we're so happy to be colleagues with you and all the great work that you're doing. And yeah, and with that, I am starting to see the Q&A box starting to populate. So
and do you want me to, I can stop sharing now if you want.
Yeah, stop sharing. Yeah, perfect. Wonderful. So we have a few questions coming in, and I'm going to do my best, folks, to group them as much as possible. But the first one really is, so who is funding this work with BGCI? Which is a great question.
It is a great question. So we have a few small grants. So we have one large IMLS grant, which is the Institute of Museums and Library Service, which is a US funding source. We also have, and that is to fund all of our US based activities. For our global based activities, right now, ABG is footing most of the bill. So we are trying to put our institutional support into this, and we are searching for additional funding, because the more we can raise, the more we can support, hopefully, coordinators and all in some of our hotspots, and increase that. We have a little bit of funding for the molecular work with the Franklinia Foundation, but right now we are still very grassroots.
Oh yeah, no, it's there's a lot of great work to be done, but we have to pay for it somehow.
Yes.
Donations are great.
Yes.
It's really great to have all these garden supporters, and this work is only made possible by people who care and opening their pocketbooks.
So true.
Yeah. So another question. So we in California, though we have a very fantastically rich and diverse flora, we do not have magnolias native to California, the West Coast. But are there any? Do you have any native magnolias to the ABG site? Because I am aware that you have some long, older forests that exist there currently. So what do you have native on site?
Mostly it's the grandiflora, but we do have small conservation. So we have 30 acres in downtown or midtown Atlanta. It's hard to tell the difference between midtown and downtown, a little bit taller buildings. But our Gainesville, Atlanta Botanical Gardens, Gainesville, Atlanta, or Georgia, not Florida. On that site is where we have more of our grandiflora. We also have a few pyramidatas that are most likely because of the previous landowners. That's what a few pyramidatas and Fraseri. The Fraseri could be native, but the previous owner of the land who donated the land to us also loved magnolias, and so we know that she was planting some around.
Okay, well, those are always good things to know.
Yeah.
So, you have a bit of, I mean, you used to live here in the Bay Area, and one of the reasons why we at San Francisco can grow the amount of magnolias we can, and the kind that we have is because we have a very cool, foggy climate. And so there are a few people who are quite interested to know what magnolias from Colombia possibly could grow here in San Francisco. And I guess the question I'm going to tweak that is, are most of the Colombian magnolias more lowland tropical, or are they more mid-montane, or are they more upper cloud forest, upper montane in general? Or
So
yeah.
they actually span. The most critically rare are the upper montane, the cloud forest actually, and the majority of those are the ones that are newly discovered. So in the past like 4 years, they've actually discovered 8 new species, and there's arguments. Some people will claim there's up to 20 new species, but there's argument, of course. Put a couple taxonomists in a room, but most of the rarest are up in that cloud forest. In the lowlands, there had been more stable populations, and some of those species are now, as I sort of indicated, at greater risk. They're starting to see more loss of some of those lowland species. But they do span quite beautifully. There's about 40 species endemic, or 40 species that are native to Colombia. So there's quite a large number.
Definitely. Going through some more. Is Puerto Vallarta Botanic Garden participating in the Bgci Magnolia group? I believe. Are they one of the members?
Yes, so they are. They're actually, we're going to be having in March. Sorry, I was trying. In March, the last week of March is our sort of Central American, and they are part of that.
Gotcha. So is there an issue with magnolias becoming more susceptible to viruses due to warming climate?
There are some researchers that are trying to address those questions. The answers are, we are not sure yet. And from what I've understood from a few of the researchers that I've talked to, that is, a lot of the issues have to do more with the elevation gradient that the species tolerate the best. And like in Colombia, the species that are the rarest are in these small little pockets at the top of mountains. And the reason we haven't found them until recently is because they occupy these very small little niches, and fluctuations in the humidity and temperature in those small regions, those small sort of microclimates, will be most likely the most impactful for the longevity of those populations.
Definitely. So another kind of combo of questions. So, I know Atlanta Botanic's been doing some great work with their plant exploration program, which Scott McMahon has the most amazing title ever as
Yeah.
what is officially director, or
he's the International Plant Exploration Manager.
yeah, I need one of those titles.
I know.
So I know you've been collecting from all parts of the world, and I'm wondering, so how are you growing these species from these more tender regions in Atlanta, because Atlanta does have hot summers and has frequent frost and colder winters? Where are you growing them if you can't grow them outside?
We have a very nice, large, big greenhouse that we grow them in. And we are working with the USDA for some of these species, some of the sort of the non-critically rare species, because most of those we have agreements with countries of origin that we have to keep them in collections. But the ones that we can, we're actually doing trials and breeding programs to create hybrids. And we have a trial garden, and the USDA Agricultural Department has been allowing us to sort of do some of these trials outside, also to test hardiness. So we do have a very large greenhouse, and also we are trialing some of them for hardiness.
Very cool. All right. So, there's some interest in the origins of magnolias, and really, where did they radiate from in terms of evolutionary terms? And are there any sort of like substantial disjunct species, any species with substantial disjunct populations?
So the belief, they're very old, so they're a very old species, and so that because we see them in both the New and Old World, so we see them throughout East and Central Asia, and we also see them throughout, obviously, the neotropics, large numbers of the neotropics. So they're quite old and probably originated prior to continents shifting. So that is the typical hypothesis right now. And disjunct populations, the most disjunct are often seen in the Caribbean islands, actually, because we see very strange, like isolated populations in the Caribbean that we can also see sometimes in like Colombia, for instance, or in Brazil. And actually Brazil is a country where we believe that the Magnolia diversity is not very well understood yet. There's only a few species that are known, but we are working with researchers that have been going out and finding new species fairly regularly, which is pretty exciting. So.
Yeah, that's crazy. Actually, only until I really recently started working here at the garden, did I realized magnolias existed in Brazil. I always considered being, kind of going down the Andes and through Central America, following that montane backbone. But I was like, Brazil.
Yeah.
Like, how did you get there? You have to get through the Amazon. So it's
Right.
it's a really just fascinating group that we always, most of us here in the U.S. think of magnolias as being East Asian and Eastern U.S. and
Right.
the diversity is so much bigger and broader than what we're used to seeing in our gardens and used to reading about.
And the flowers are, I mean, I know you all have a wonderful collection there, but looking at some of the flowers that are very, very waxy to these extremely ephemeral, like one day sort of blooms. I mean, it's just amazing. They're really diverse and unique.
Oh, definitely. So one of the always classic question, and probably one of my least favorite, just because everyone always wants to know what's your favorite. But do you have a favorite magnolia, or is that a?
Oh, I know that's such a hard question.
No,
I mean, I would say the problem is it shifts because as I find new species and I would say as we work with new species. So right now, the work that I mean, I guess the species that I have yet to get to see in the wild is the Rasputinifloria in Colombia, and that is the one that they're doing the creating the Molinillos, and that one is just such a neat story. But I would say right now we're working on Zenii and Stellata, and they're both really pretty, really pretty. So I have a soft spot for that, and then of course Ashii, because we have a fair amount of Ashii in our conservation collections.
Wow, that is fantastic. So, kind of being relevant to our, let's see, oh, there's a new one's popped up. So one of the, and I just lost my train of thought for a moment. So after all this COVID debacle ends, where do you think the first spot you'll be running off to will be?
Well, so
Yeah.
we were supposed to go down to the Dominican Republic for some work, and Colombia. Those were our next two big trips. So I'm hoping that that's the case. And with the Dominican Republic, there's a hopeful trip to Haiti. So I'm looking forward to that. That trip is with a partner, and that would be really exciting. But Colombia and Ecuador, we work a lot. We do a lot of also orchid work. We do a lot of orchid conservation, and both of those countries are also the hotspots for orchids. So we will probably be ending up in Ecuador and Colombia. And we have a research station that we have partnership with in Ecuador that we get to go and stay. So that's exciting. Those are two trips I miss both countries very much because they are truly special places.
No, definitely. That sounds so exciting. Another question, which I love this one actually. So when would we expect to see some of these plants coming into San Francisco Botanical Garden?
Hopefully, Well, I know that right now you all are working with a cuttings program.
Yeah.
And so hopefully some of those, as some of those protocols are developed, and once we can get, so one thing is bringing plants in is much easier to do when you are traveling with them than sending them by post. We are right now just sending tissues back and forth because we have, sometimes when you get seeds, these seeds don't store well, and the cuttings don't ship terribly well when they could be stuck in customs. And right now with some of the mail issues, we have been just very hesitant. So hopefully in the next year or so.
That sounds great. And you put a plug in for the project we're working on with Atlanta and JC Ralston Arboretum and UC Berkeley Botanic Garden. It's really great to be, collaborating with everyone on these propagation projects and sharing our collections with each other. So, and I can't thank your colleagues enough at Atlanta for being so collaborative, so above and beyond helpful and enthusiastic to participate in this sort of pilot program, which we're hoping to adapt to bring in more people. So for all of our visitors here today, if you want to help contribute to that project so we can make a bigger impact and send more Magnolias to other collections, please feel free to email me. It looks like we have time for probably a couple more questions. So Emily, do you have to speak Spanish while traveling in Ecuador? So I guess in Colombia, do you speak Spanish?
Not well. I understand much better. I did my PhD in the Galapagos, and I used to speak better Spanish when I was living on the islands. So I understand a fair amount, and once I'm there for a week, I can start to survive. So it's kind of one of those, once I get immersed back into it, but I am not by no means proficient enough, which is very frustrating. But I do have a member on staff who is fluent Spanish.
Wonderful.
In that.
We look forward to having you immersed more often. So
Yes,
yeah,
me too.
Yeah.
I miss that. I miss it. It was much easier when, living in when everyone else is speaking Spanish. It's really useful.
Totally. And last question: do you plan to visit us after all of this ends?
I would love to.
Bgci for a visit. Good.
Yes, I would absolutely love to. My husband is in technology, which is why we used to live in the Bay Area. And so, yes, he is out there all the time, and I miss California and all of the beauty of the region. So I would love to come visit.
Wonderful. Well, we look forward to having you at some point safely. And maybe even during the busiest season, Magnolia season, but we bloom a lot earlier than you do. So maybe come in and then fly back for your Magnolias.
Exactly. Definitely. Yeah, we have you guys are in, we still have cold temperatures. It's still getting to freezing here. So yeah, we're not at bloom peak anywhere near.
Perfect. Well, Emily, thank you so much. This has been absolutely fantastic. I've had a great time. I'm going to speak for everyone else who's joined today that they've had a great time. And we really appreciate you having you with us today.
Thank you so much. We really appreciate. I appreciate the opportunity, and thank you for all of the great work you guys are doing out there. We really appreciate your partnership also. So thank you so much.
All right. Well, with that, everybody, have a wonderful evening and enjoy some dinner.
Yes. Good
Bye.
night.
Night.